They told them the Americans would be monsters, that enemy hands would tear away every last shred of dignity, that capture meant torture, that surrender meant death. So when 247 Japanese women stumbled off that transport ship into San Francisco Bay in October 1945, their bodies braced for violence. What they got instead was something far more terrifying: kindness. And they couldn't accept it. Not yet. Not like this. Not while their hair crawled with lice and shame made them feel less than human. 3 words whispered through their ranks like a prayer. We are unclean. If stories like this move you, hit that like button right now. What happens next will change how you see everything about World War II. The war had ended 2 months earlier, but for these women, the nightmare had just shape-shifted into something they couldn't understand. They'd been nurses, radio operators, clerks, scattered across Japanese military posts from Manila to the Marshall Islands. When the Emperor's voice crackled over radios announcing surrender, their world didn't just end. It collapsed. Some had survived on remote islands where food ran out weeks before the surrender. Others had crouched in trenches during bombing raids, watching the sky turn to fire. Now they stood on an American deck, watching California emerge from fog like a dream, or maybe a trap. The Golden Gate Bridge rose before them, untouched, gleaming. Their own cities were ash. Ko was 23. Her fingers, once swift across telegraph keys in the Philippines, now trembled on the ship's railing. Her hair hung in matted clumps, 4 months without proper washing. None of them had washed properly in 4 months. And the smell. The shame of it made her want to disappear. But here's what no one expected. The American sailors looked bored, not angry, not vengeful. They chewed gum and laughed with each other, casual as Sunday. These were the men who'd bombed Japanese cities, who'd killed their brothers. Yet they acted like this was just another Tuesday. What kind of enemy does that? The gangway lowered. An American officer appeared with a clipboard. His voice was firm but not harsh as he called instructions through a translator. The women formed lines, wooden shoes clacking against metal, carrying everything they owned in small bundles. Or nothing at all. Then the smell hit them. Fresh bread. Baking somewhere nearby. The scent drifted across the water and Ko's stomach clenched so hard she almost doubled over. When was the last time she'd eaten bread? Before the war. A lifetime ago. Some of these women had subsisted on rice balls and dried fish, some on nothing at all. The dock buzzed with normal activity. Forklifts, trucks. American voices relaxed and businesslike. No preparation for executions, no torture equipment, no rage. They'd been told Americans were demons, but demons don't bake bread. Military buses arrived, windows covered with wire mesh. The seats were padded. Ko sat down and nearly wept at the simple comfort. As they rolled through San Francisco, the women peered through the mesh at a city that looked like it had never heard of war. Buildings stood tall. Cars filled streets. People walked on sidewalks carrying shopping bags, pushing baby carriages, living lives that looked normal. A girl on a bicycle waved at their bus, an innocent gesture that several women couldn't process. They looked away. Ko pressed her forehead against cool glass. Back home, Tokyo was rubble. Her mother and sister were living in a shelter. She'd gotten one letter, weeks old, telling her they'd survived the firebombing. Survived. Not lived. Survived. The contrast made her throat tight. How had they lost so completely to a nation that had never known real hardship? After nearly an hour, the buses turned through gates marked Camp Stoneman. Guard towers rose at intervals, but the soldiers in them looked more bored than menacing. The barracks were wooden, olive green, arranged in neat rows. Compared to bombed-out shelters, the camp looked almost orderly. Then female American soldiers appeared. WWII, Women's Army Corps. This shocked the Japanese women. They hadn't expected American women in uniform. The WWII were professional, expressions neutral as they directed them toward a long building. Inside, processing tables. Name, rank, duty station, capture location. Questions translated calmly, recorded efficiently. Ko answered in a small voice, eyes on the floor. Then came the announcement that made Ko's heart stop. They'd be taken to the delousing station. Medical examinations, clean clothes provided. The words should have brought relief. Instead, a wave of shame so intense swept through the room that women went pale. Some began crying quietly. This was the moment they dreaded most. Not violence, not cruelty, but exposure. Their filth would be revealed. In Japanese culture, cleanliness is sacred, a matter of deep personal honor. To be dirty, lice-ridden, unkempt, it's to be less than human, and they had no choice. Ko's hands began shaking as they approached the delousing building. Steam rose from roof vents. She could hear water running, feel humid air escaping through doorways. Beside her, an older woman named Sachiko whispered prayers under her breath. Inside, white tile, harsh overhead lights making everything painfully bright. Rows of shower heads, metal bins for soiled clothing, and 3 American nurses waiting. Not soldiers, nurses. Their faces were kind, movements gentle as they gestured for the women to undress. Through the translator, one nurse explained the process. Remove all clothing. It would be burned. Shower with delousing treatment. Medical examination, then clean clothes. The words were straightforward. But for these women, each instruction felt like a knife. Ko's throat tightened as she removed her jacket, her shirt, her undergarments. Around her, women moved slowly, eyes downcast. Some cried openly now, silent tears streaming. When Ko loosened her hair from filthy pins, clumps came away in her hands. Matted tangles fell past her shoulders, greasy and crawling with lice. She could see the insects moving in the strands. The shame was suffocating. She wanted to cease existing rather than stand exposed like this. But here's what made her breath catch. The American nurses didn't recoil. They didn't show disgust. They handed out towels, pointed toward showers, spoke in soft voices that needed no translation. One nurse, young, red-haired, freckled, met Ko's eyes and smiled. A small smile, sympathetic, as if to say, "I understand this is hard." Ko stepped under the shower head. Water came out lukewarm, then hotter. Steam rose. She reached for soap. Thick, white, smelling of something clean and floral. As she scrubbed, the water at her feet turned gray with dirt. She scrubbed until her skin turned pink, but her hair remained a problem. No amount of soap would fix this in one shower. The tangles were too severe, the lice too deeply embedded. Around her, other women were having the same realization. Their hair was ruined. Some would need their heads shaved. Others would need medicated treatments over days or weeks. When Ko finally turned off the water and wrapped herself in a towel, she felt cleaner than she had in months, but not clean enough. Her hair still hung in awful clumps. She could still feel movement against her scalp. The shame hadn't washed away with the dirt. After drying, they moved to the examination area. American doctors waited with stethoscopes and blood pressure cuffs, checking systematically for tuberculosis, malnutrition, infection, disease. When the doctor examined Ko's hair, his expression grew serious. He called over a nurse, spoke in English. Through the translator, they explained. Ko needed special treatment. The infestation was severe. They'd have to cut her hair short and apply medicated powder. The news hit like a physical blow. In Japan, a woman's hair is her pride, her beauty, her identity. The doctor, seeing her distress, spoke gently through the translator. The infestation could spread if untreated, could lead to infection. Short hair would grow back healthier and cleaner. His words made sense. But sense didn't ease the pain. Ko wasn't alone. Of the 247 women, more than 200 had infestations severe enough to require cutting. As realization spread, collective grief settled over them. They'd already lost their homeland, their families, their freedom. Now they'd lose even this small piece of dignity. After examinations, they were led to another room where stacks of clean clothing waited. American military surplus dyed plain gray to mark them as prisoners. Shirts, pants, underwear, socks, shoes, all clean, neatly folded, free of lice and filth. The wax sergeant gestured for them to take their sizes and dress. No one moved. The women stood in their towels, wet hair dripping onto concrete, staring at the clean clothes as if they were cursed. The sergeant frowned, confused. She spoke to the translator, who turned to the group. Why weren't they getting dressed? What was wrong? Sachiko, the older woman who'd been praying, stepped forward. She was a former nursing supervisor, 41, gray streaking her tangled hair. She spoke in halting English, then repeated in Japanese. "We cannot," she said. "We are unclean. Our hair. It is not right to put clean clothes on unclean bodies. We would dishonor the clothes. We would spread our filth." The translator relayed this. The sergeant looked even more confused. She tried to explain the clothes were just standard issue, nothing special. They needed to get dressed to move on. But Sachiko shook her head. Behind her, the other women murmured agreement. Ko found herself nodding. Yes. This was right. How could they accept clean clothes when their hair remained a nest of lice? It would be wrong, disrespectful. Even in defeat, even as prisoners, they could not abandon all sense of propriety. "We must be clean first," Sachiko continued. "Truly clean. Our hair must be treated. Only then can we accept these clothes." The sergeant stared at this group of women refusing clothing. In all her months of service, she'd never encountered anything like this. Prisoners who refused clothing. Women who considered themselves too unclean to dress. The distress on their faces was real. She left to find someone with authority. The women waited, still in towels, water pooling at their feet, determination holding despite physical discomfort. 20 minutes later, the sergeant returned with a captain from the medical corps and a senior WWII officer. Through the translator, they heard the situation. Japanese prisoners refused to dress until their hair could be properly treated. They felt it would be disrespectful to wear fresh clothes while still lice-infested. The captain, a woman in her 30s named Helen Morrison, studied the group. She'd served in field hospitals across Europe. She'd seen soldiers with frostbite, refugees with typhus, concentration camp survivors barely alive. But this was different. These were enemy combatants, women who'd served Imperial Japan. By all rights, they should be processed efficiently and moved along. Yet they stood before her, not defiant, not demanding, but ashamed. Requesting not better treatment, but to be made clean enough to deserve basic clothing. Captain Morrison made a decision that would ripple through the camp and beyond. She turned to her staff and gave quick orders. Bring all available medicated lice treatment. Set up stations with scissors, combs, anti-parasitic powder. Call in off-duty nurses and WWII volunteers. They were going to treat these women's hair. All of them. Today. Within an hour, the delousing facility had been transformed. 6 stations were set up, each with a chair, supplies, and an American woman ready to help. News had spread through camp. Volunteers appeared, nurses, WWII clerks, even a colonel's wife who'd heard what was happening. Captain Morrison addressed the Japanese women through the translator. "We understand your concern about cleanliness. We are going to help you. Each of you will have your hair treated properly. Some will need it cut short. Others may keep more length after treatment. But we will not move forward until you feel you can accept clean clothes with honor. Is this acceptable?" Sachiko's eyes filled with tears. She bowed deeply, and the women behind her followed. It was not what they'd expected. Not from the enemy, not from anyone. They'd prepared for harshness, for efficiency, for being processed like cattle. Instead, these American women were offering them dignity. Ko was directed to the 3rd station where a young nurse named Sarah waited. Sarah was maybe 25, blonde hair pulled back in a neat bun, uniform crisp despite the humid environment. She smiled at Ko and gestured to the chair. Ko sat rigid, mortified that this American woman had to touch her filthy hair, had to see lice crawling through it. She wanted to apologize, but the words stuck. Sarah worked methodically. Her touch was gentle despite the difficult task. She applied medicated solution, working it through section by section. The smell was sharp and chemical, but not unpleasant. As she worked, Sarah hummed. A tune Ko didn't recognize, but found oddly soothing. After the treatment sat for the required time, Sarah began rinsing with warm water. Then came the cutting. Sarah showed Ko the scissors, miming the length she'd need to remove. About 6 inches, leaving hair just below the ears. Not as short as Ko feared. Ko nodded consent. The scissors made soft snipping sounds. Dark clumps fell to the floor, carrying months of accumulated horror. With each cut, Ko felt something lift. When Sarah finished and held up a small mirror, Ko barely recognized herself. Her hair, though short, was clean and neat. Her scalp was free of movement, free of the crawling sensation that had plagued her for so long. Sarah applied one more treatment of powder to ensure all lice and eggs were dead. Then she did something that made Ko's breath catch. She took a clean comb and gently styled the short hair. Made it look presentable, even pretty in its own way. It was such a small gesture, so unnecessary from a medical standpoint. But it acknowledged Ko's humanity, her desire to look decent, her right to dignity. Around the room, similar scenes played out. American women treating Japanese women with care that transcended nationality. Some Japanese women were crying. Some sat in stunned silence. A few even managed small smiles. The process took hours. By sunset, all 247 women had been treated. Some had very short hair now, almost military cuts. Others had kept more length. But all were clean. Truly clean. For the first time in months. When Captain Morrison returned and asked if they were ready to accept clean clothes, Sachiko stepped forward once more. This time she didn't just bow. She dropped to her knees and pressed her forehead to the floor. The deepest gesture of gratitude Japanese culture could offer. Behind her, 246 women followed, prostrating themselves before their captors in thanks. Captain Morrison, visibly moved, asked them to rise. "Please," she said through the translator. "Stand up. You don't need to bow to us. Just accept the clothes and get some rest. You've been through enough." But what came next was even stranger. The days that followed settled into an unexpected rhythm that made everything Ko thought she knew about the enemy fall apart piece by piece. Each morning, a bell at 6 a.m. The women rose, made beds with military precision, assembled for roll call. American guards were present but not oppressive. They checked attendance, made sure everyone was accounted for, but didn't shout or threaten. Breakfast was served in a large mess hall. The food was simple but abundant. Oatmeal with brown sugar, scrambled eggs, toast with butter, coffee or tea. For women who'd grown used to a single bowl of rice per day, when they got that much, it was overwhelming. Ko ate slowly, savoring each bite, unable to believe it was real. After breakfast, work assignments. The women were organized into groups. Some worked in the laundry, others helped in the kitchen. A group with medical training, including Sachiko, assisted in the camp infirmary. The work wasn't difficult. They got regular breaks. Ko was assigned to the administration building, helping sort mail and maintain files. Her typing skills, rusty for months, gradually returned. The American clerk who supervised her, a WWII corporal named Betty, was patient, even friendly. She'd bring Ko coffee during breaks, sometimes share pictures of her family back in Ohio. Lunch at noon, another substantial meal, sandwiches, soup, fruit. The fruit amazed Ko most. Apples, oranges, sometimes bananas. Fresh fruit had become a luxury in Japan even before the war ended. Here it appeared daily, casually, as if it were nothing special. Afternoons continued with work until 4 p.m. when the women were released to their own time. They could rest, read books from a small library, or gather in a common area to talk quietly. Some wrote letters, though they knew the mail would be censored and might never reach Japan. Others simply sat, processing everything happening to them. Dinner at 6 p.m. was often the heartiest meal. Meat, potatoes, vegetables, bread. Generous portions. Ko noticed she and the other women were gaining weight. Their faces were filling out. The hollow look of starvation was fading. Some younger women were even starting to look healthy again. After dinner, time for bathing. The camp had proper shower facilities with hot water. The women could bathe as often as they wished. For Ko, the nightly shower became a ritual. She'd stand under warm water, running hands through her short hair. still amazed it was clean, still grateful for what the Americans had done that first day. But then came the letters. 3 weeks into captivity, the first letters from Japan arrived. Ko's hands shook as she opened the thin envelope bearing her mother's handwriting. The paper was cheap and water-stained. Her mother wrote of the struggle to find food. Rice was rationed to starvation levels. Fish was scarce. The black market charged prices no one could afford. Ko's younger sister had been working in a factory, but it closed, leaving them with no income. "We are surviving," her mother wrote. "That is all we can do. Survive and pray you are safe wherever you are. Please, if you can, send word that you are alive. It would ease my heart to know." Ko read the letter 3 times, then folded it carefully and held it against her chest. The guilt was crushing. She'd just eaten roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, and apple pie. She'd thrown away food because she was too full to finish it. Meanwhile, her mother and sister were starving. The contrast was unbearable. Similar letters arrived for most women, tales of hunger, destruction, desperation. Some families had lost their homes entirely. Others had lost family members to starvation or disease in the chaotic months after surrender. Reading these letters in a camp where they had 3 meals a day, hot showers, and comfortable beds created a cognitive dissonance that was difficult to process. The women began seeing America with new eyes. On Sundays, they were sometimes allowed to watch approved newsreels in the camp's recreation hall. The images showed American cities bustling with life, factories producing consumer goods, stores filled with merchandise, families buying cars, going to movies, living in houses with electricity and running water. The prosperity was staggering. Ko thought about what they'd been taught during the war, that America was weak, decadent, spiritually empty, that American soldiers were cowards who would crumble before Japanese discipline and honor. Yet here was the truth. America had fought a war on 2 fronts thousands of miles from its shores and emerged stronger than ever. Meanwhile, Japan, for all its talk of divine destiny and warrior spirit, lay in ruins. Everything they'd believed had been wrong. Not all interactions with Americans were formal or distant. Small moments of humanity began accumulating. Corporal Betty, who supervised Ko in the office, brought her a book one day, a collection of photographs showing different regions of America: mountains, beaches, cities, farmland. Betty pointed to one image, a small town with a white church and tree-lined streets. "That is my home," she said slowly in simple English. "Ohio. Very beautiful. Peaceful." Ko studied the picture. It looked like a place from a dream, untouched by war, innocent of suffering. She pointed to her chest, then to the ground. "Japan," she said. "Also beautiful before." She made a gesture of explosion with her hands. "Now broken." Betty's expression softened. "I am sorry," she said, and Ko could see she meant it. This American woman who had every reason to hate the Japanese was expressing genuine sympathy for their suffering. Another day, Sarah, the nurse who'd washed Ko's hair, stopped her in the camp yard. She carried a small package wrapped in brown paper. Through gestures and simple words, she made Ko understand it was a gift. Inside, a comb, a small mirror, and 2 hairpins. "For you," Sarah said, smiling. "Your hair. It grows. Soon you need these." Ko's eyes stung with tears. The gift was small, practical, but it represented something profound. Sarah had thought about her, had anticipated her future needs, had cared enough to bring these items. Ko bowed deeply, words failing her. When she looked up, Sarah was still smiling. She reached out to briefly squeeze Ko's shoulder before walking away. These moments accumulated. A guard who shared his chocolate bar during a work break. A cook who showed them how to make American-style cookies and let them help. The camp chaplain who arranged for a Buddhist priest to visit so the Japanese women could observe their own religious practices. Each gesture chipped away at the image of Americans as heartless demons. One evening, the women gathered in their barracks and talked about these experiences. Sachiko, who commanded respect, posed a question many had been thinking, but few had dared speak aloud. Why are they kind to us? We were the enemy, we fought against them. Some of them must have lost brothers, husbands, friends in the war. Yet they treat us with dignity. Why? The women offered various theories. Perhaps strategy, making them compliant. Perhaps propaganda, showing the world that America was merciful. Perhaps simply military regulations they had to follow. But Ko thought of Sarah's smile, of Betty's photograph, of the captain who'd ordered her staff to spend hours washing enemy prisoners' hair. Those had not been acts of strategy or propaganda. Those had been acts of simple human kindness. And that was perhaps the most disturbing realization of all. Because if the Americans were simply kind, simply decent people following their own values, what did that say about the war? What did it say about the Empire's claims of moral superiority? 2 months into captivity, Ko began keeping a diary. She'd found a small notebook in the camp store, a place where prisoners could purchase items with credits earned from work. Her first entry was hesitant. November 15th, 1945. I do not know what to think anymore. The world I knew has ended. I believed we were fighting for honor, for the Emperor, for the survival of our nation. I believed the Americans were cruel invaders who would destroy us. Yet I sit in a warm barracks, my stomach full, my body healthy, treated with more dignity than I expected. How do I reconcile what I was taught with what I now see? The question haunted her. At night, lying in her bunk, she thought about the propaganda she'd absorbed. Films showing American soldiers as brutal monsters, radio broadcasts describing American atrocities, the certainty that surrender meant death or worse. All of it had been wrong, deliberately, systematically wrong. She thought about the moment Sarah washed her hair, the gentleness of those hands, the care taken with someone who should have been an object of hatred. Ko had been raised to believe in the superiority of Japanese culture, in the special destiny of the Japanese people. Yet here was an American woman showing her more consideration than she'd received from her own military superiors in the war's final chaotic months. The conflict inside her was painful. Loyalty to Japan wasn't something she could simply discard. Her identity, her sense of self was bound up in being Japanese. Yet loyalty to what? To Japan as it had been, or to what she'd been told Japan was? The Emperor had been presented as divine, the military as invincible, the cause as righteous. All of it had crumbled. Where did that leave her? She wrote in her diary again a week later. I am ashamed of how much I enjoy the food here. Ashamed that I sleep peacefully while my family suffers. Ashamed that I find myself liking some of these American women even though they are the enemy. Is it wrong to be grateful to them? Is it a betrayal of my country to see them as human? Ko wasn't alone in her struggle. The barracks at night became a space for quiet, intense conversations. The women, freed from strict military hierarchy, talked more openly than they ever had before. They questioned things that had once seemed unquestionable. One night, a woman named Yuki, who'd been a radio operator in Saipan, spoke bitterly. We were told to die rather than surrender, to preserve our honor through death. I saw women throw themselves from cliffs rather than face American capture. They believed the propaganda. They died believing it. And for what? So they wouldn't have to face the truth that the Americans are not monsters. Her words hung in the air. Other women nodded slowly. They'd all heard the stories. The mass suicides on Saipan and Okinawa. Civilians jumping to their deaths. Soldiers detonating grenades rather than surrender. All of it driven by fear of American cruelty that had turned out to be a lie. Sachiko, always thoughtful, offered a different perspective. Perhaps the cruelty was real in some places. War brings out the worst in people. But here now, we see something different. Maybe the question isn't whether Americans are good or bad, but whether any people can be simply one or the other. Maybe we were taught to see the world in black and white when the truth is more complicated. But we were not taught that, another woman interjected. We were taught that Japanese were superior, that our way was the only honorable way, that everyone else was beneath us. If that was wrong, What else was wrong? The conversation spiraled into territory that would have been dangerous, even treasonous, before the war ended. They talked about the military leadership that had led them into disaster, about propaganda that had poisoned their understanding of reality, about the emperor whose supposed divinity had been the foundation of their entire worldview. Not everyone agreed. Some women still clung to old certainties, unwilling or unable to question them. They argued that the kindness they were experiencing was an aberration, that America's true nature would eventually reveal itself. But even among the resistors, doubt had taken root. It was visible in their eyes, audible in the way their voices lacked conviction. December brought cold weather to California. The camp provided the women with coats and warmer clothing. This simple act, providing winter gear to prisoners, struck Ko as significant. In the war's final months, Japanese soldiers had frozen to death in inadequate uniforms while their superiors hoarded supplies. The contrast was stark. One afternoon, while sorting files in the administration building, Ko came across a document left on a desk. It was a copy of the Geneva Convention protocols regarding treatment of prisoners of war. She couldn't read all of it. Much was in English. But the translated sections were clear. Prisoners were to be treated humanely, provided adequate food, shelter, and medical care, protected from violence and degradation. Ko stared at the document. The Americans weren't being kind out of the goodness of their hearts, though she believed many of them had kind hearts. They were being kind because they followed rules, international rules that they'd agreed to, that they apparently took seriously. The idea that a nation could constrain itself, could choose to follow rules even when dealing with defeated enemies, was foreign to everything she'd learned. Japan had signed the Geneva Convention, but never ratified it. In practice, Japanese forces had treated prisoners however they wished, often with extreme cruelty. Stories of Allied POWs in Japanese camps were beginning to emerge. They were horrific: starvation, torture, medical experiments, forced labor unto death. Ko felt sick thinking about it. She thought about Sarah washing her hair, about the hours spent treating all 247 women with care and dignity. That had not been required by the Geneva Convention. That had gone beyond mere compliance with rules. That had been human compassion. And she realized something profound. America's strength wasn't just in its factories or weapons. It was in its systems, in rules that applied to everyone, in the idea that even enemies deserved basic human dignity. Japan had preached honor, but practiced brutality. America practiced a form of honor that didn't require propaganda to sustain it. That night she wrote in her diary with shaking hands, "I understand now why we lost." It was not just ships and planes. It was that they built a society where people matter, where rules protect even the weak, where compassion is not weakness, but strength. We were taught that such things were Western decadence. We were taught wrong about everything. The moment of complete transformation came in January 1946, 3 months into captivity. The camp administration announced that Japanese repatriation would begin soon. Ships were being arranged to transport prisoners back to Japan. The news should have brought joy. Instead, it brought a complicated mixture of relief, fear, and unexpected sadness. Ko's first thought was of her mother and sister. She'd see them again. She could help them, share what little money she might earn, be a support rather than a burden. But her second thought was darker. She'd be returning to a ruined country, to hunger, to deprivation, to a society psychologically shattered by defeat, and she'd be leaving behind the strange comfort she'd found here. The full meals, the hot showers, the clean clothes, the Americans who'd shown her unexpected kindness. The thought of leaving produced an emotion she hadn't anticipated: grief. On the evening before the first transport departed, the women who were leaving held a gathering. They'd been given permission to use the recreation hall. Someone had prepared rice balls using ingredients from the kitchen. A taste of home. They sat in a circle, sharing memories, preparing for the journey ahead. Sachiko spoke first. "When we arrived here, I believed I was going to my death. I had heard the stories. I expected cruelty. Instead, I found human beings who treated us better than we deserved. I don't know what this means for the future. I don't know how to explain to my family what happened here, but I will carry this experience with me. It has changed how I see the world." Other women nodded. They shared their own stories. The small moments of kindness, the realizations that had shaken their worldviews, the guilt of being well fed while their families starved, the confusion of feeling gratitude toward the enemy. When Ko's turn came, she spoke quietly. "I will never forget the day they washed our hair. I was so ashamed. I felt less than human. But that American nurse, Sarah, she treated me with such gentleness. She gave me back my dignity when I thought I'd lost it forever. I don't think I can explain to anyone back home what that meant. They won't understand. But I will know. And it will change how I live." The next morning, 150 women, including Sachiko and many others, boarded buses for the first leg of their journey home. Ko wasn't among them. Her transport was scheduled for 2 weeks later. She stood with the remaining women, watching the buses pull away, feeling the weight of impending transition. That afternoon, Sarah found Ko in the yard. The nurse had heard about the departures and wanted to say goodbye before Ko's own departure came. They stood together awkwardly, the language barrier making conversation difficult, but the sentiment clear. Sarah handed Ko a small photograph. It showed Sarah and another nurse standing in front of the delousing station. On the back, Sarah had written in careful block letters, "To Ko, good luck. Your friend, Sarah." Ko looked at the word, friend. Such a simple word. Such an impossible word given the circumstances. Yet Sarah had written it, and Ko believed she meant it. She clutched the photograph to her chest and bowed deeply. When she straightened, tears were streaming down her face. Sarah reached out and hugged her. It was brief, unprofessional, completely against regulations, but it was real. And in that moment, Ko understood that the war had not just been lost on battlefields. It had been lost in the hearts of people who'd learned that the enemy was not what they'd been told. That humanity transcended nationality. That kindness was a force more powerful than propaganda. The 2 weeks before Ko's departure were strange. She went through daily motions, but her mind was elsewhere. She thought constantly about what awaited her in Japan. The destroyed cities, the starvation, the shame of defeat. How would people treat returning prisoners? Would they be seen as survivors, or as failures for not having died honorably? She thought about her mother's reaction when she saw her daughter healthy, well-fed, wearing decent clothes. Would there be relief, or resentment that Ko had lived well while the family suffered? The safest course would be to say nothing, to keep her experiences private, to hide the truth of what she'd learned. But the thought of doing so felt like a betrayal of Sarah, of Captain Morrison, of all the Americans who'd shown her that the enemy was not what she'd been taught. When Ko's departure day came, she was given a small package containing processed paperwork, civilian clothes to replace her prisoner uniform, and a modest amount of money. The Americans even provided food for the journey, sandwiches and fruit packed in a simple bag. Betty, the corporal who'd supervised her in the office, came to see her off. She pressed a small gift into Ko's hands, a fountain pen, slightly used but functional. "For writing," Betty said. "Letters, diary, stories. You write good." Ko wanted to explain that her English was still poor, that she'd only managed simple filing tasks, that she didn't deserve such a gift. But the words wouldn't come. She could only bow and whisper, "Thank you. Thank you." The journey back to Japan took 3 weeks. The ship was crowded with repatriated soldiers and civilians, all returning to an uncertain future. Ko kept to herself mostly. Her diary and Sarah's photograph were her only companions. She wrote every day, documenting memories while they were still fresh, afraid she might forget the details if too much time passed. When the ship finally entered Tokyo Bay, the sight was devastating. The city that had once been a gleaming capital was now a wasteland. Entire neighborhoods were gone, replaced by fields of rubble. The few buildings still standing were blackened by fire. People moved through the ruins like ghosts. their faces hollow, their clothes in tatters. Ko found her mother and sister living in a shelter made from salvaged materials. One small room shared with 3 other families. The reunion was tearful, but it was also awkward. Ko looked healthy. Her hair, though short, was clean and neat. Her clothes were worn but intact. Next to her skeletal mother and gaunt sister, she looked almost prosperous. "You were fed," her mother said. It wasn't an accusation, but it wasn't entirely neutral either. "The Americans treated you well." "Yes," Ko admitted quietly. "They did." She didn't elaborate. How could she? The months and years that followed were difficult. Japan struggled to rebuild from devastation. Food remained scarce. Work was hard to find. Ko eventually found a position as a clerk in a small business. Her typing skills were still valuable. She spent most of her earnings supporting her mother and sister. She rarely spoke about her time as a prisoner. When asked, she gave vague answers. Yes, she'd been captured. No, she hadn't been mistreated. The Americans had followed the rules of war. That was usually enough to satisfy curiosity without revealing the deeper truth. But privately, the experience shaped everything. She kept Sarah's photograph in a small box under her bed, taking it out sometimes to look at it. She kept her diary, adding to it occasionally when memories surfaced. And she kept the pen Betty had given her, using it to write letters, record thoughts, maintain a connection to the person she'd become during those 3 months in California. As Japan slowly recovered, as the occupation ended and normal life resumed, Ko watched her country change. The old certainties were gone. The emperor had renounced his divinity. Democracy was being introduced. American influence was everywhere, reshaping Japanese society. Some people resented it. Others embraced it. Ko did neither. She simply accepted it as the natural consequence of what she'd learned. That the Americans had not been the demons they were portrayed as, and that their system, for all its flaws, had something valuable to teach. Years later, when Ko had a daughter of her own, she finally told the story. Her daughter was 14, asking questions about the war that schools didn't fully answer. They sat together one evening, and Ko retrieved her diary and the photograph. "I was a prisoner once," she began, "and the enemy showed me more kindness than I expected. They washed my hair." She told the whole story then. The shame of being unclean. The refusal to accept clothes until they could be truly worthy of them. The American women who'd spent hours treating their hair with gentle hands. Sarah's smile. Betty's gift. Captain Morrison's decision to honor their sense of dignity, even though she had every right to ignore it. Her daughter listened with wide eyes. When Ko finished, the girl was quiet for a long moment. Then she asked, "What happened to Sarah? Did you ever see her again?" Ko shook her head. "No, I never knew her last name. I don't know where she went after the war, but I think of her sometimes. I hope she lived a good life. She deserved to." "Why did they do it?" her daughter asked. "Why were they kind when they didn't have to be?" Ko thought about the question. It was the same question she'd asked herself 1,000 times. "I think," she said slowly, "it's because they believed that even enemies deserve basic humanity. That rules matter. That kindness is not weakness. We were taught differently. We were taught that compassion was soft, that cruelty was strength. But they showed us another way, and that way won the war." And so the simple act of washing hair became more than a medical procedure. It became a symbol of everything the war had taught and everything it had destroyed. For those 247 Japanese women, the moment when American hands gently cleaned away months of filth and shame became the moment they understood that the world was more complicated than propaganda had told them. They'd refused clean clothes because they could not bear to dishonor them with their uncleanliness. But the Americans had honored that feeling, had respected their sense of dignity enough to spend hours making them worthy of those simple gray uniforms. It was a gesture small enough to be overlooked, yet profound enough to change lives. Ko carried that memory for the rest of her life. In her darkest moments, when post-war Japan seemed overwhelming, when the struggle to survive felt endless, she would remember Sarah's gentle hands in her hair. she would remember the kindness that required no thanks, no reciprocation, no propaganda value. Just human compassion freely given. As she told her daughter that evening, decades after the war ended, "We expected them to break us with cruelty. Instead, they rebuilt us with kindness, and that kindness was the most powerful weapon they had, because it forced us to see them as human. And once you see your enemy as human, you can never hate them the same way again." That's the story worth remembering. Not just the battles and strategies, but the small moments of humanity that persisted even in war. The moments when people chose compassion over cruelty, dignity over degradation, kindness over hatred. If this story moved you, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. These forgotten moments of World War II deserve to be told, shared, and remembered. They remind us that even in humanity's darkest hours, light can still break through. Thank you for listening, and remember, small acts of kindness matter.